us in olden times there?
Off with your head.
Just get a big dragon and blow them all up.
You left your post off with your head.
There you go.
Will you bring that?
Like
Kyle. Kyle, we
Leave
look
your
like
post
twins.
off with
What
your
happened to us?
All right, well, we'll wait for the young hipster to come.
I've officially joined the...
What do you mean? I'm already here.
Oh, not as young hipster.
I know how you. You're just like, I'm going to let the circus.
I'd like to
take
call
over.
Budget and Appropriations to order at 5:30. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. We have the police, the collector, the fire, water, and wastewater today. But before we get going, I'd asked Barry and I had spoken, so we just want to give Barry an opportunity to discuss a little bit about some of the funding sources and give a little bit of a historical perspective. So everyone should have received a handout from Barry that looks like this. Yeah, I'll put one in the desk there.
Thank you.
All right. All you,
Thank you,
Barry.
Mr. Chairman, and for this opportunity. So as you may recall in the mayor's budget message, he mentions the use of the one-time use of a $1.2 million from free cash to offset several non-recurring, non-operational expenses, such as snow reserve for the 53rd payroll, anticipated retirements in the police and fire departments, and the assessor's revaluation, and the FY20 spec stabilization fund. And I know that this was sort of out of the ordinary based on the past 5 budgets, so Chairman and I spoke, and he thought it would be a good idea to sort of go over some historical perspective and why the mayor had proposed this method. As you may know, the FY19 free cash was a record high in Attleboro. And because it was a record high, it presented the administration with some opportunities. The opportunities to pay for several non-recurring, non-operational FY20 expenses now rather than out of next year's free cash. By doing that, the mayor had intended that it places the city in a stronger free cash position next fall when free cash is certified, because we won't have to pay back the stabilization fund as we've done for the past 5 years. So what you have in front of you is a historical synopsis of the past 5 budgets in which we subsidize the budget with mostly stabilization fund. And then next in the columns to the right, you'll see what the certified free cash was, and then next to that column is the required payback. And the resulting net available free cash, you'll see the percentage change of that free cash went down because of that payback requirement. And then if you skip all the way to the bottom of FY20, where we're not using any stabilization money, we're using instead available free cash, you'll see that whatever free cash is certified in the fall, there'll be nothing obligated to pay back, and therefore 100% of the certified free cash will be available for things like capital improvements, things like operational needs if necessary. And I think that the large amount of free cash gave us that opportunity. So for the first time in the last 5 years, we won't have to pay back the stabilization, a rather large chunk of money.
Couple things. First, thank you for putting this together. I appreciate, you always say you have the open door, 100% you do, so I appreciate the time this week and throughout the course of my time here. So, Barry, can you just talk a little bit about what's free cash, what's stabilization?
Sure.
Just kind of a quick...
So free cash is basically, I look at it as two things. One is the revenues that came in over projections, and secondly, it's the expenses that weren't used that fall out of the general government. So I know it's a little bit more than that, but in essence, that's where the larger amounts come from. The resulting amount is what is certified as free cash available for any lawful purpose, usually in the fall when the tax rate is, right around when the tax rate is set. So that money becomes available in the fall for use in that fiscal year. Whatever is not used in free cash goes to the following free cash.
Great.
And stabilization is something different. Stabilization is like a savings account. We call it a rainy day account. We're now, I think, over $4 million for our stabilization. The cash reserve policy that the council adopted puts approximately $282,000 per year into that stabilization. We use the stabilization to borrow money from it, so we don't have to borrow it from banks, and then we pay it back whenever we can. We don't do it all the time, but if we need it for a match of a grant or something like that, it's been this administration and the past administration's policy to be able to borrow from our stabilization without interest, use it for a match of some sort, and then pay it back at a later time. So we've done a real good job, thanks to the council and the administration, of building that stabilization fund. It takes a 2/3 majority of the council to remove it, so it's literally a rainy day fund, and it's meant to grow, and that's something that bond rating agencies look at. It's something they should look at. It's something we should be proud of, and something we should continue to grow, because we're not there yet. That's why we still have that policy of putting $282,000 into it.
And then just kind of, and I know there's so many variables, but if you could just ballpark what you're thinking the free cash number would be.
I'm not going to go there. I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you that, on average, I think the cash reserve sheet gives a basic average over the last several years. And, if you look at the average since 2002, the average is $2 million. The median is $2.1 million, and that's over a 17-year period. Over the last 5 years, the average has been 3.1. The median has been 3.12.
Right.
So, what is it going to be? I don't know.
But I think that information is helpful, because I think it kind of puts into perspective and gives a better narrative for why the approach we're taking this year.
Yeah, so I can't tell you what it's going to be. We never quite know until the end of the fiscal year, and Deb and I always play a game as to how much we're going to think it's going to be. But I guess the point is that one thing's for certain: whatever it is, we won't have to be paying anything back to the stabilization fund for money we use for the FY20 budget. So 100% of it in the fall will be then available for whatever this honorable body and the mayor agree to.
Excellent, thank you. I know Vice President Parika has a question, then I'm going to want to jump right into the police chief, so we're cognizant of his time.
Sure.
If there are any other questions, if there's time at the end, we can, if it's all right, we can circle back at that point. Even if you wanted to email it to Virginia, I just want to make sure we're cognizant of the chief's time, where we scheduled for 5:30. So. All right, Barry, thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I think it was very helpful. So, Chief, welcome. Police is on page 25 in our budget books. So, Chief, what we've been doing is just kind of giving the department head an opportunity to talk a little bit about what your budget looks like, anything you think that's important for us to know, and then we'll open up to questions when you're done.
Oh, great, thank you.
Of course.
I'd just like to start out by telling you about some of the challenges that we're facing today in law enforcement, and that I actually joined the Glasses group this year. So
I was going to notice, I was going to say something. You pull it off nicely.
thank you. So yeah, hopefully I'm not told I look too young to be the police chief. And,
I think you ever did.
thanks. Nevertheless, the law enforcement issues that we face today, if I could put them in a form that's applicable to Attleboro. Nationally, obviously, there's a lot of police issues that could be debated of what's challenging us as a society, as a community, and internally as a police department. But for us in Attleboro, I identified the number one being training. We need more training. There's no such thing as overtraining. The challenges that we are facing today are coming at us in every different way, and we see it in our school systems too, with our teachers, our social workers, our mental health workers, even our local community hospital. The ER is not really the ER anymore, it's the ER/mental health facility. So, and we're experiencing that too, because they usually come through us to get to the local ER. So we need to train our officers not only with the traditional training topics, but these new training topics. Who knew 10 years ago there'd be a thing called the dark web? in our offices would have to be conducting investigations into the dark web, or that we wouldn't have so-called verbal threats anymore. We have cyber threats. And how do we investigate that? So we're trying to keep up proactively with the contemporary issues, but it's challenging. We need more training. Like I said, there is no such thing as overtraining. The next one would be, unfortunately, active shooter response. We're seeing it more now. It's more commonplace that communities of various sizes, small towns, large cities, are experiencing active shooters, so we need to be prepared for that.
Chief, if I could jump in real quick there with the active shooter, just I don't want to forget, I actually had the opportunity to participate in the active shooter drills this winter at the high school, and it's a lot that goes into it, and even seeing some of the debriefs from some of the officers when they were asked, okay, what happened, what did the suspect look like, where did he go? It was a drill, and they were still really nervous. And I think it just goes to speak to your point that how important training is, because especially with this active shooter, we had one yesterday.
Denver, I believe, right?
Yeah. And then we had one, 2 weeks ago in North Carolina. So the ability to be able to respond, having the resources there, but the training to allow them to really know how to act appropriately, I think that really hit home for me, because I was fortunate to have my son there as well and participate. So
Thank you.
I just wanted to say kudos there, but also drive home the importance of that particular piece of training.
Thank you. The next would be officer recruitment. We are a civil service department, and we're structured by the civil service rules and regulations according to state law. If you're not familiar with the rules of civil service, the state offers a statewide civil service test. You put down the cities and towns that you would like to be employed by, and when those cities and towns are hiring or have vacancies, you get notified. They come sign the list. We conduct a background vetting process, and then the physical abilities test and what have you. We're currently hiring 7 officers right now to replace the retirements and transfers to the state police. It's been a challenge. It's been a challenge because of the lack of interest becoming a police officer today. And I think that's kind of the national mantra. No one wants this job. The challenges people are facing in this job, that's why you have an early retirement. People don't want to come into the police service. It's troubling, and I don't know what the answer is, but I recognize there's a problem, and we're limited with our civil service structure. Unlike other departments who can hire like the private sector, they have more options to pick and choose. We're limited. We get sent a list, and if we're not going to take a certain candidate, we have to operate under the basic merit principles of the rules and regs of civil service that articulate why we're not taking that candidate. Civil service has its benefits. It avoids all politics. It keeps politics out of decision-making and what have you. That was the thought years ago on why they rolled civil service out. It does work when people want the job. So years ago, police and fire were very sought-after jobs, stable income, pensions, retirement. Nowadays, not so much. So the next issue is forced overtime. We have a new generational workforce. They're kind of different than probably people of our age or older, that 30 years ago, forced overtime was kind of unheard of. Now, we're getting grievances from unions about how much forced overtime they have to work, because no one's voluntarily taking the overtime. So what's the solution? Usually it goes by seniority of who gets forced to work. The junior person with the least seniority gets forced to work over the highest seniority person who's been here the longest. That creates burnout. That creates poor decision-making, negligent operations, and legal trouble for the city. Something's got to be done. So, do we hire more police officers and cut back on the overtime to reduce the amount of overtime we need? maybe that's the new generational workforce that's required, that we have more officers and less overtime. So there's no need for overtime. No matter what, I think the costs are the same. You're going to pay for overtime or you're going to pay for salaries. It's going to happen. But something's got to be done. This generation just does not want to work. Their time off is their time off, and don't interrupt them. In my opinion, what I experienced. The next one would be police de-escalation, use of force. We're challenged also. We keep track of how many use of force incidents there are. We discuss those, we review those, and no force is the best. Minimal force to compel compliance. It is illegal to resist arrest. It is a charge. However, at the end of the day, the person does have to be taken into custody within reason, within reasonableness. Nationally, use of force by police officers is heavily scrutinized, as we can see in the news, in academia. So we are cognizant of that. We don't want to be on YouTube. We don't want to be on the front page. We don't want to be on the lead of Fox News and CNN. We don't want to be one of those communities. And that can go direct back to number one with training, all right? So we want to be the department that is the best at de-escalation. The sixth would be the condition of the police station. The bottom line is we need a new station. We're operating in an archaic building with no space, and it's not fair to the police officers. It's not fair to our community, and it's downright embarrassing. So those are the top six. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? No?
Peter?
Are you still having trouble filling extra duty shifts?
Oh, yeah.
So that goes along with the overtime.
Absolutely. With the police dispatches, the police officers, the police superior officers, it's an issue.
Details are real tough.
Same thing. Same thing. That's why you're seeing constantly on the street outside details from other communities. This generation doesn't. My father became a police officer in the city in 1969, 1970. They relied on details to bring
Goodbye.
to live. It was factored in. If they didn't work 1 or 2 details a week, they didn't pay the electric bill, gas bill, oil bill, something. When I came on 20 plus years ago, there were arguments over who got the details. I had 2 hours less than you. I don't know why you got a detail over me. There was no problem filling details. You watched the list like a hawk. Now, they won't even answer their phone. They just don't want to. Their downtime is their downtime, and that, you know what? That it's just a new generation, right? But we're a business of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can't say, okay, let's shut down for the next 8 hours. It's okay. We got to respond.
Right.
But now we got to be creative and think outside the box here. So, thank you.
Council Conchi?
The training issue really bothers me. I read your police reports and I see the officers going into classes all the time. How much more training do you think it would take for you to get comfortable about an adequately trained force?
I do want to give kudos to the mayor and Barry, because they do recognize what I brought to their attention. There is no such thing as overtraining, but to the mayor's credit and to Barry's credit, I brought this issue to their attention. Our current fiscal year budgeted amount was $48,500. If you divide that $48,500 by all the police officers and dispatchers, it comes out to fund training at $532.97 per person. So basically, we can probably get about anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of training to those officers. I brought it to the mayor's attention, I brought it to Barry's attention, and they recognized that that's unacceptable. So especially with, we just had the shooting 6 months ago with the 2 officers, where we need more training. I would answer your question, Mr. Conti, with millions and millions and millions of dollars, but we're not going to get there. So we got to start somewhere, and the mayor and Barry did recognize that we need to increase that training account. I would love to have each officer with a minimum, say, $5,000 per training per year on different subject matters. We try to do the best of what we can.
So if I could follow up, so let's say it was $5,000, because I think that's not unreasonable, and based on what I see, just as an assessor getting trained on how to work in a complex government system. And that would take them out of the service for probably 3 weeks over the course of a year, $5,000 training, which would more intensify your forced overtime issue.
If we had adequate staffing, meaning you and I are always in agreement that we should probably have a little more officers than we need due to retirements and seamless transitions. But say we had a minimum of 8, 9, 10 officers on the street, but we deployed 15. We could send 3 or 4 to training without backfilling. And if somebody retired, we would have that seamless transition, because it takes about a year and a half to get an officer trained and up on the street. So during that course, we would have enough numbers to bridge that gap. You and I have always been in agreement with that.
And I'm still feeling that way. You know, I think that you've been understaffed for a long time, and that the overtime's been too high for a long time. But the training issue, I think, is more serious than the forced overtime problem, and that's why you have it as number 1. And
There are ways, not to cut you off, I'm sorry.
well, that's where I was going on the revolving accounts that you have. Is there a possibility of sliding some of that revolving account into training?
I would have to speak with the mayor and the city auditor on that. I don't know, but I like your thinking. You know what I was thinking when you were talking is, with this new generation too, cyber training's not unheard of also. There are collective bargaining agreements regarding training and compensation. If we do it on duty, off duty, do they get compensated? Or, that'd be a challenging aspect. But this generation, they don't use textbooks anymore. It's all computers and Chromebooks and what have you. So that may be something that we could try to curb with the overtime costs by getting more training. I do like your outside the box thinking, though.
Well, the last thing, if I may, is that I attended mandatory active shooter training in the city of Taunton. They put every employee in the city through this class, and it was a half a day. And I think it was very similar to what it wasn't an actual drill. But the videos that they showed, they burn in your mind. I was affected by that active shooter program. In fact, I think we talked about it. Is that
So the Alice program?
what's that?
Alice?
I don't know who the people were, but what an eye opener that is, and how exposed we are in the government offices. It's just we're still talking about it, and the active training shooting happened 2 months ago. It's become such a frequent, almost every week.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see Attleboro in the headlines for that. And
Do you think we're coming numb to it as a society?
I do, and I think that we're not going to train ourselves out of the problem. It's a new way of living, and it's very disturbing. So, putting myself, from my own experience, into your job responsibility and your new recruits, I get the feeling that we're trying to, what's the saying, drain the swamp and getting bit by alligators. It's because we're so constrained by available funds. I'm very interested in discussing new income revenue streams, whether it means higher permit fees or something to build up that revolving account to at least get this number to $1,000 an officer. And I'm eager to hear what our controller has to say about that.
I appreciate the sentiments, and I'm in agreement. And before I get to Deb, just a question, might be more towards Barry. We don't see any of the host agreements anymore from any of the marijuana businesses coming in. Is there any plans? Huh?
Excuse me,
Okay, sorry.
thinking the same line.
Is there any plans or anything in those host agreements where we could take some of the proceeds from the marijuana business and put them into the revolving accounts, or a way to help kind of offset some of this training? Because we sit down here when they all come down. Have you talked to the chief? What's your security plan? Are there, and they're all like, oh, there's going to be extra patrols. There's going to be check-ins. So I think it puts a strain. So I don't know if you can't answer it, if you don't have the answer in front of you. I should have asked you yesterday when we were talking. If you could get that to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know that there's at least one host agreement that mentions police.
Okay.
And certainly with the revenue from the marijuana dispensaries, that's new revenue to the city, and I think a discussion between this honorable body and the mayor should, and obviously the police chief, should take place about the use of that money. But I'll look at the host agreements and
Great.
get back to you guys. I think one does mention
Okay.
police. But just to finish the thought on training, I want to make sure.
Just before, because
Yep.
the point about meeting with the mayor, I'd be 100% all for that. I
Yep.
think it's something that we have to, because, Council Conti and I talk about, and aptly so, the pig and the python, right? Like, it very well might be a very novelty, and we're going to get a big peak out of it, and then it might drop off. But I'll reach out to the mayor, see if we can set something up to have that conversation.
Yeah, and those host agreements generally run for 5 years, but there's nothing that says they can't be renewed.
Right.
But just to follow up on the training issue, I draw your attention to the tuition and book line in the police department and purchase of services. There, to the chief's credit, is where he really pushed for an increase. So the mayor increased it by 106%. That's where your training dollars come from.
What line are we looking at?
Tuition and books, 532010. It's under purchase
On
of
page
services.
26. Tuition BK.
Thank you.
Look.
Just to touch base on a couple of things relative to training. The police department, in their false alarm revolving account, did spend $14,661 in fiscal 2019 on alarm response training for the officers this year. The other thing that the department does with frequency, I believe, Chief, all of your dispatchers, and I think your offices are largely trained on the 911.
Correct.
Which is, it's all grant-related income, but they go after as much as they can in other revenue sources from grants and that kind of stuff. It's never going to be enough, like the chief said, but they do have a 911 support grant that provides some training to all dispatch, annual requirements for that.
Yeah, that
There is
came
some
out.
use of the existing police false alarm revolving account. Fingerprint would not qualify that revolving account, which is an account we need to touch base on because of the type of account it is and what the use of it is. You might be able to modify, in some respects, the police replacement vehicle, but that's predominantly for the fleet, and there's not a lot of income in that for that type of thing. So the uses of the revolving fund are now by ordinance. There needs to be a nexus between the source of income and the use of fund by statute, which is related to the ordinance. But in the where there is an opportunity to do so, the chief has done that relative to the false alarm, because you do some training on that, and I believe you spent some money this year. I don't know to the level of what it is, but there has been activity where the opportunity exists throughout a number of funds. They're very good at the department. There are a couple of other funds that the chief has access to, restricted by either federal or state law. There's the Federal Forfeiture Fund, and there's some training that the chief utilizes that for. It's limited by what he can use it for, but he's very judicious with that, as well as using the State Law Enforcement Trust Fund. Again, it is a limited fund under the restriction and purview of the chief. He's the only one that can say what those funds can be used for. And we verify it relative to statute and make sure it's consistent with what the allowable uses are. Little training out of that, but probably not much more on the federal side. So every opportunity every resource he has, he evaluates and uses to, so as you consider the $100,000, it's not like he isn't using other resources. He's asking for this, but he's also doing everything he can with other revenue opportunities that are out there.
And that's
I
a
just wanna
great
make
point.
sure.
Kudos to you and your department, your grant writers. You guys have done phenomenal in getting grants, and I think that that's something that can't be overlooked. And there's some that we get every year, such as the Burn Grant, which I think is just fantastic. But, I think that, you just augmented very, very nicely what Chief was saying.
Just a wrap-up question. When you attend the police conventions or conferences, and you're talking to other chiefs, are they also smitten with like a $500 per person training fund
It all depends on their
on their community? So
like-
some communities are recognizing this issue already, and they're forcing more dollars into the training fund.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that this is abnormally low.
It is.
And I would like to see it addressed. And that concludes my comments on the subject.
Kudos. Question, you have 7 going to the, hopefully bringing 7 on to go to the academy. What are we looking timeframes for that?
We're restricted by the state when they offer the academies, so they had an academy start in April.
Yep.
We missed that because of the vetting process.
Sure.
We're hiring 7 candidates. We're already over 250 names.
Wow.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, so, and there's been some really interesting candidates that voluntarily have withdrawn. Some were just statutorily disqualified because of convictions of crimes and what have you, or being the subject of a active criminal investigation. There's been some interesting background investigations done. So the personnel office has been helpful. I've been bugging them for months now. We started this process, I think, November, December,
Wow.
and we're still trying to isolate candidates that would meet our expectations or statutorily can be a police officer.
Right.
Some have domestic violence, 209A, active orders. I mean, it's 250 names to find 7 people. I mean, that's the state we're in for recruitment.
And then we still have to go through the process, bring them on, get the medicals and everything else.
Right, exactly. So that just because they meet the background investigation requirements, they may not be physically fit for the standards, or they may have some type of a medical condition that prevents them from being a police officer, maybe a cardiac or what have you. Then they have to pass the academy. And so each stage of this process costs the city money. And if we lose a candidate at some stage, we lost all that money. We got to start all over
All
again.
over again. And then you're looking at a 6-month, and once they're out of the academy, if my memory from my time in the police commission holds true, there's 6-month ride-along time where they're with an FTO.
So the field training officer program, once they graduate from the academy's 6 months long. They get out of the academy, they go on the road with a full-time training officer, and that's a regimented program. And that's required due to the liability of you maybe putting on the wrong officer. Just because they get through the academy doesn't mean that they may be fit for the job or suitable for the position. And so it's also another vetting process, as we can see what happened in Connecticut recently with a shooting down there. If you've been keeping tabs on that shooting, that officer was a police officer in another community, left and went to the community where that unfortunate shooting happened. There were significant red flags in the previous department, documented red flags. So
Even
that
before,
FTO program is extremely important.
huge. And so before we even get to the training, we've got to get the new recruits on board, get them ready to go. And so it's a vicious circle. So I saw Vice President Freak and then Council Kovitz.
Thank you. I just have a couple questions.
Well, actually, you're on the committee if you wanted to go. If
I was just going to encourage us to get to actually looking at the budget.
Yes, that's where I'm going.
Well, but I think that this is, as the chairman of the committee, I think that this is a very important subject to have as it fully relates to the budget and the needs of the department.
I was just
These are
watching the
alligator
time.
bites.
I do appreciate that. We still have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so then back to me then?
Yes.
All right, cool. So as I'm looking through the budget, so there are a couple of areas that are kind of popping up to me that aren't necessarily funded or have a zero recommended for 2020, and perhaps maybe you could give me a little background on that. So the line of duty line, which was funded for 2019, is $125,000, and it's not funded at all in the requested for 2020. In addition to that, as it pertains to some of the conversation that we already had, I would have to guess that there's a particular type of individual who would like to be a police officer, which may include some military service time, and that line item also was not funded for 2020, so I didn't know if you could highlight, or either one of you could give me a little information on those.
So each year, the employee salaries are funded in the full-time regular salary line.
Okay.
And then as July 1st comes, I send the auditor the transfer for the amounts that we're going to need to cover that full-time military deployments and any line of duty injuries called LOD, line of duty injuries, into those accounts. So they start out zero, but they on day one we just transfer the money down to those accounts.
Okay, terrific, and thank you.
And it was also important to note that the chief also started 7 minutes afterwards because of the presentation Barry made, which was at the chairman's request. So,
I have all night. We're good.
okay, so I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page here. Do you have another question, Councilor Robles?
Maintenance of software increased about 100%. I was wondering if there were specific projects or why it's funded at $33,455 as opposed to we spent like $15,000 last year.
So we went to a new CAD software, and part of that agreement on buying the new software, the first year tech support would be free. So we were supposed to go to the new software in FY18, and due to the company's delays and getting other departments online, it delayed us, so the domino effect happened. So we actually went live in FY19. So and the agreement was that we would have 1 year free tech support. So the company honored that agreement, which allowed us to repurpose those funds that was originally funded for the tech support agreement. And with the permission of the mayor, that's how we purchased the detective cubicles. If anybody would like to come by and look at them. The detective's office had cubicles in them. They were installed in 1985. For lack of a better word, they were disgusting. They were deplorable. And they needed to be replaced. And that's how we did that. So we repurposed those funds, and I'm proud that I didn't have to come back to this honorable body and request money, that we were able to do it within our budget. So that's something that I like to do. I don't like to come down here and ask for money unless I absolutely need it. So.
Nice job on that, by the way. One thing I'll note, I know a lot of us have the spreadsheets that Council Cobus created, which is very nice because it's color-coded. One thing that's important to note that a lot with the police, especially, a lot of the increases, decreases, whatever you might see, it's contractual. So I did have a phone call out to the chief. We went through, I think 90% of what you see in the increases, if not more, are contractual. So I just wanted to, see, give me one, just let me finish my thought. And then you'll see this, I think, is similarly in the fire. So, but I do appreciate the work that you put in on this. I think it was very helpful. Do you have another question?
Yes, please. So the one other question for new computers, I see that you asked for 15,000 and we're given 4,500. One of the things with that, I know you guys have the new cyber detective, correct?
Yes.
If I understand correctly, this individual was helpful with the threat to the high school just recently.
Tremendously.
And so I just want to make sure that you asked for 15,000 there, but we're given 4,500. Was any of that to help support this new detective, and will they be able to accomplish their mission?
The original request for $15,000 was based upon a conversation and agreement that I had with MIS, Bill Lennox. He identified a source to lease to own computers through Dell Corp. They had a program where over the course of the years you could pay to lease to own the computers. So we were going to replace 50 computers, $15,000 a year. I believe it's for 4 to 5 years, and then we would own the computers thereafter. That was brought up at the budget meeting. That was decided not to be executed. And the conversation that I had with Barry and the mayor was that we were going to use free cash to purchase those new computers.
So the background to that is that the program that was identified originally was a lease to own, but there was an additional at least $6,000 of interest. So in discussions with the chief and the mayor, the chief thought that if he could at least get these computers up and running by the end of the calendar year, it would work. It would save the city money if we just purchased these computers outright, and that's what the mayor had agreed to do once free cash was certified in the fall.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I have a tail end to your question. So in the new contract, the officers have a uniform cleaning option. I requested this honorable body to fund the exposure to that amount for the fiscal years. Not every officer has elected to utilize that service. Therefore, we have a reservoir of funds left over. So I'm going to send a letter to the mayor, who I had already had a verbal conversation with, and then ask this honorable body to repurpose those funds. So it's going to be a letter to asking you if I could use those funds that are going to be left over to use those funds to purchase the computer crimes detective, the software, computer programs that he needs to do his job. Also, to buy 2 workstations in the shift commander's office. Those workstations were donated by TI 20 years ago. Those are also deplorable. And obviously they use 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So this would be the 11,000 that you have for uniform cleaning, or
Yeah.
no, 5,000.
The initial request was for 27,000.
We're talking about 19.
Yeah, 19.
Oh, okay, got it.
So,
Yep.
so I sent, when the contract was settled after the original budget of FY19. It was settled, I believe, in August. So we didn't know what was in the contract. We didn't know what we could fund in the FY19 budget, or even what was going to be required through the contract. Part of the agreement was the uniform cleaning clothing. So I sent the request down to cover that exposure of what it was going to cost for that new bargaining agreement, specifically for the uniforms, and it was $27,000 to June 30th. There's 8 weeks left in the fiscal budget, so we're going to keep as much money. If everybody used that amount in that account, how much we're going to need, we're going to keep that in there. But then there's going to be an extra amount left over, and we want to repurpose those funds. Instead of coming back and ask the council for money, we have it in our budget. May we use it so we don't have to come back and ask you guys for additional money. You know what I mean? That's what I like to do. That's what I like to
So
proud of.
bottom line is, you don't have a concern about this new cyber detective being able to accomplish their mission with this budget?
No, but yes, if this honorable body refuses to allow me to repurpose those funds, then the answer is yes. If we are allowed to transfer those funds to repurpose them into the computer line for new computers, then I could buy him the software and the computer that he needs to conduct forensics investigations.
Got it.
That makes sense?
Council Waterman.
Yes.
Okay.
Council Waterman.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate, I agree entirely with the need for increased in training. I'm shocked that it comes out to $500 per officer. And certainly I think doubling it ought to be a real goal, if not the immediate future.
Thank you.
I want to compliment the force on the work you do with mental health issues. And as a social worker at the Y, I've personally experienced several issues over the years. And you have, if you don't get that training, you're faking it really good, because you get the best out of the people you've got. You do a good job.
Thank you.
You really do. So I have a question. The first responders going from 36 in last year's revised budget to 75,000 this year. I'm sure there's a very good reason, but I thought you'd like to address that.
So that's line item 519, so that is a new contractual item in the contract. So the 36,000 represents what the cost would be for the offices that were on the department when the contract was settled. Now 75,000 represents the entire complement of officers. That's why that number's that way.
Thank you. Deb?
So just to clarify, on the handout from, that everybody received from Councilor Cobus, for the revised in FY19 uniform cleaning, where it says actual 27,640, that includes purchase orders for the cleaning. Chief, that's what you're anticipating, canceling a significant portion of that purchase order, only retaining what's required for the balance of FY19, freeing up the money and sending a communication to this council prior to June 30th to get the equipment needed for the cyber computer analyst, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then, in order to finish your plan, you would need the administration to forward in the fall free cash for the acquisition of computers. And instead of it being $15,000, it would be the equivalent of the outright purchase in the fall.
The fall purchase would be 50,000.
50. Okay.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page, so.
On the list.
That's what we asked the mayor on Monday night.
Right.
Okay, good. Anything else, Chief?
No, everything else that's in here is a collective bargaining agreement that's been bargained with the city and the police union, and reflects the increases in those accounts.
Excellent. Deb?
I don't know if I'm going to be sorry, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
What's that?
If you're bringing people on in May and the academy isn't until April, what are we going to do with them from May of 2019 until April of 2020?
Whatever the chief says.
So, which is a fair answer, but like, so can you do the reserve police officer training between now and then?
What we're going to do is we're going to train them in dispatch, right?
And then-
We're going to have them do ride-alongs. We're going to utilize them in cell attendance, various aspects, administrative positions in the job. So a lot of vacations. What happened throughout the summers is a lot of people go on vacation. So the firearms licensing officer, the detail scheduling officer, the records clerk for public records requests. So
All the stuff they'd learn after the academy, they'll learn up front, sort of.
not really a primary duty of a police officer, but we need somebody to come out of the bullpen and perform those jobs. So we're going to train them in those jobs, so when those vacations happen, we can backfill them there. We can also backfill for dispatching duties, cell attendant, what have you. So the class that just graduated in November, I believe they graduated, they did the same thing. They had approximately 7 or 8 weeks before they went to the academy. So this isn't new to us. So we also trained them in those areas to keep the continuity of the department running.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought there was only one class a year and it started in April. There's multiple classes, you just missed the April window.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So there's multiple academies across the state. I want to say there's 6 or 5. I don't count Agawam because we could never send them there. But depending on when their classes graduate, the state's funding for a new class, their staffing levels, what's the interest of getting officers into the academy. So if some years they only may have, say, 10 departments hiring, they may not have enough officers to run an academy. The state closed 2 academies, New Bedford and Boylston. So now there's a waiting list to get into academies.
Okay.
So we're under intense pressure right now to get guys into, or ladies into the September academy.
Okay.
You can go online, you can see how many seats are left. They're dwindling. Because here's the problem. I don't want to take any more of your time, but it's like an assembly line. You get the list from the state. They come in, sign the list. They get a background packet investigation. They fill it out. They bring that back. We assign it to a detective. He conducts a background investigation. That's a vetting process. We get it back. We see if there's any problems in the background. We conduct an interview, maybe a second interview. If there's significant issues, we have a board of inquiry. All right. Then we say, okay, this person's properly vetted. He meets our expectations and the basic merit principles hiring with civil service. We're going to send him to Sturdy Hospital for the PAT test. Not the PAT, the medical test, and the psychological exam. If they pass that, then we'll bring them to the PAT test. The PAT test is the state mandated test that they need to have at least 6 months prior to the academy. If we can't secure a seat in the academy without the PAT test. But we can't take the PAT test without having the medicals done. We can't send them to the medicals until the backgrounds are done. And we can't have the backgrounds done until they actually give us the application packet. So one step, it's a linear process, and it's frustrating because now if you don't get the PAT test done, the academy say, okay, we can't guarantee your spot. You need that PAT test. So, and they only offer the PAT test once a month. So, yeah, there's a practice exam. The mandated practice test, skip a week, and then there's the PAT test, the official PAT test. So, and if you fail the PAT test, you only get one more chance. Then you got to hire somebody else. You got to start the process all the way
And lose that money that you've already put into it.
On the way.
and you lose all that funding, all that money that you just put into that recruit. So it could be $1,500, $2,000, depending on how many tests they need medically. If they have cardiac issues, that you have to send them back for, the drug testing, the psychological exam. Then there's CBA requirements for uniforms, and it's challenging.
We're glad you're the one managing the challenge.
Thank you.
But thank you for coming down, Chief. And if there's any questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to email me, and I can go through the chief, and then we'll have Virginia send out the answers and responses.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief.
Appreciate it. I do appreciate the support of this honorable body for our police officers. I'm very proud of them, of what they do and what they persevere every day and for the greater good of this city. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank them for their service as well, please.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions.
All right. And now we're on to the collector. Come on down, Deb.
Harry, it helps when you tell us the page.
Sorry.
It's page 14.
We're not quite there yet.
Page 14.
Thank you.
Under the chair, Kyle, behind you. Next chair up. Up the aisle. There you go.
Hey, ladies.
Put the glasses on. Put the glasses on. Deb, welcome.
Thank you.
So welcome to your last budget hearing.
Yes, my last budget hearing.
Well, before we go, just want to say thank you for your service to the city of Attleboro. It's been a pleasure working with you, and you will certainly be missed.
Thank you.
So what we've been doing is giving the department head an opportunity to just kind of talk a little bit about their budget and then fielding questions from this honorable body.
Okay.
And again, we are on page 14 in your budget book.
My budget this year, the salary line has gone down because we've had change of employment in the office. Someone was promoted to a position upstairs in the health department, and so we've hired a new person in our office who is working out tremendously well, which also has an effect on your longevity payments. The banking services, because we no longer pay for the fees for people to use their online banking checks or their checking account number. We used to pay for that service for them, and they now pay 25 cents a piece, of which I've had one phone call in displacement of liking the fact that they had to pay the 25 cents. Other than that, so we don't have banking services any longer. So rather than totally give back the money, we split the money up into different lines for the city where we have movement of funds throughout the year, which that would be in printing and reproduction, the advertising line, which is for tax title, and the advertising, printing and reproduction, and supplies.
Recordings.
Recordings.
Pardon me? Recordings, that's what it is, recordings. I lost my train of thought. Recordings, yes, because I never know how many I'm going to have, and it changes, it fluctuates all over the place. I've been keeping track of it for quite a while, and back in 2011, we had 240 accounts. In 2018, I had 120 that were sent up to tax title. So we do what we possibly can do in order to make sure that, you know, we don't have as many people going upstairs. Laura is very much into helping the people that are already up there and trying to get them on track so that they can be able to start paying downstairs and understand what is happening to them so that they don't go back up again, because it hits about $200 in fees every time they go up in tax title for a new taking. So we're trying to avoid those issues as much as possible. Still doesn't mean that I don't have more people that go up that have never been in before, but we do try to, over the summer months, we start in July. The takings aren't done until November, so we have from July to November to work on all of these accounts that are outstanding and try to get the money in to get them paid. So that, and working on printing bills constantly, and the motor vehicle excise tax bills, people at the window. We do have the lockbox payments, which has been moved from Boston to Woburn. One hand takes away a lot of work and then turns around and gives you a lot of work in another area. So everything that we seem to do to try to help the office to have less work, to make it more advantageous for us to be able to do other things, we find out that that has evolved into another method of more work that we didn't have prior to that.
Okay. Deb, do you have anything?
Relative to the salary, there's, you'll notice if you look at the budget sheets, there's a reduction in the 25th week because Deb's not planning on running. Everybody knows that, so that drops back to step 1 on the salary and wage scale, which is why you can see the difference between the 22.11 per week and the 16.45. If Deb hadn't pointed out the banking services, I would have. That's a savings to the taxpayer of the city, not necessarily the individual. But if you mail a check in, you'd be paying more money for a stamp than you would if you paid the convenience fee of 25 cents. I thought that was a good step on the part of the administration to get rid of everybody covering that cost. I mean, it was rising. It was up to over $5,000 last year in fiscal 18. So that was completely unnecessary taxpayer money being spent. So I thought that was a really good thing for the office to work with the administration to do. One of the things that I know Deb has looked at in the past, and I would advocate for in the future, is for the outsourcing of the bills to be printed elsewhere. I think it would free up the time of the city collector in the future, and whoever that candidate is and the new person, they'll have enough to learn and to take on and to get done. And I think it would be more efficient for the office to spend its time doing collections, so less is going into tax title if they can do more collections in the collector's office. Deb, could you have any idea what type of savings? I know some of it would shift. I mean, if bills were printed outside, the economies of scale, you'd save some in postage because
postage is going to stay the same. Your postage is not going to change because you still have to pay. We use Kelly and Ryan for our motor vehicle excise bills. We don't pay them a dime for them printing our bills. We get that as part of the service because they're the deputy collector and they get a fee at the end once it goes to warrant. Right. So that's how they absorb that cost. But I do have to pay for the mailing of the bills. That doesn't change. The additional cost you would have, because I've done the work on this once before and it didn't work out, the previous administration did not want that to happen, so we kept printing bills. But the savings that you would have would be through the MIS department because they have a software package that they have to use for my bills directly to be mailed. That's about $1,500 a year that it's only being used by me. They have probably about I think he told me it was 3,500 combination between the toners, all the toner that I go through to print the bills. I'm printing approximately 120,000 bills a year just for real estate, personal property, and utility bills. And that's only your major districts in utility bills. So if you outsource your bills later, you're still going to need paper in my office to do bills because we do finals and intermediates for people on their closings or whatever they're doing them for on a regular basis every day. We do the monthly billing for businesses. Then we have small businesses that get done. And we also have the city bills. So there's a number of bills that you would still be required to do because it would not be feasible for you to do a small amount like that with an outside provider. But when you're doing almost 3,000 bills every water run for 5 different districts within 3 months, that's a lot of paper going out every other week. We have one commitment in the same month that your tax bills go out. And your tax bills, you're talking about approximately 14,000 bills that go out. It's over $5,000 to mail those bills. Postage is very expensive. We do it bulk mail. I follow the rules that the post office, I have a good repertoire with them, that they set out for me to do for them so I can maintain those charges. We earn a discount that we're given to every time we do the billings. So there are certain bills that no matter what you do, if that come out of the postal data software, that it's information they get from the post office, no matter what happens. If it doesn't qualify, it goes out at the regular postage rate. So those get mailed out in the mailroom with the regular mail. But there's a lot of bills constantly that would go out in bulk mail.
But your time.
My
is
time,
spent
I'm the one that's spending the time doing it.
You're the collector,
100,000
not the
envelopes
printer.
a year.
But the issue is that, do I put a staff member on it who's much more equipped to posting payments and handling people at the window? They do it all the time. Or do I go out in the mailroom and print those bills and fold them and stuff them in the envelopes and take them to the post office?
Well, I think it's something
I think it's
worth
something that the
looking.
administration, I think it warrants a conversation or a recommendation to at least look at it.
100% agree.
And I think that
I agree.
there's the postal, there's the equipment that is rented, that, the
Folding machine.
the folding machine, we pay significant sums of money, and the time in the office spent doing that.
Yeah.
I don't know about other communities, but I think we're one of the few communities left that does in-house printing of bills. And there might be opportunities to look at doing, I live in a different community and I get one mailing for my real estate tax bill twice a year, and I'm responsible for, the tear off and doing two. You'd save $5,000 a year in postage alone if you only did the 2 mailings as opposed to the 4.
I think we need to be looking at ways that we can become more efficient, and I think this would surely be one of them. So, one question, and then, Laurie, you still have a question?
Yeah, so have we priced that out previously? When you say the previous administration didn't want to do it, was it because, did we weigh out
I have to stand up for the city here. When we switched over to Munis and we switched over our billing to be done through Munis, Munis provided us with the forms through their system that they had that we set up and used, and we paid a lot of money for that. So there's no way that you would want to just immediately after you've done that. I think it was in '06 we did the utility bills, and I don't remember what the year was for tax bills, but I can't remember the dates. I have them written down in my office. The time that we had that service provided to us and the software that they used to set up the bill formats and all that, we dished out a lot of money to pay for that. So we had to use it, because you don't want to turn around and say, okay, now we're going to outsource the bills when you haven't even gotten your full value out of what you did to set up your bills in the first place. So I think that the previous administration may have taken that into consideration.
I'm sure cost has changed as well at this point. So just for the sake of time, what I would like to do instead of getting into the weeds on this particular item, and it's a good question. I think it's something that I know personally I've spoken to Deb about. It's something that I will be putting in a recommendation into the budget message. So Todd, quick question and then
quick comment. So this year with the debt exclusion coming on, I would expect there to be some sort of an increase in the number of overdue accounts and whatnot. I wouldn't expect there to be a significant cost. I wouldn't expect the cost to be all that much, but one of the things I would love to see over the year is if you have data you can provide us sort of comparing last year to this year, and just so we can have an understanding of
delinquencies?
What the change is as compared to last year.
Almost setting a new baseline due to the tax exclusion.
Yeah, so because I can tell you on I'm pretty sure those reports when we send out, the demands go out in May because if the fourth quarter's not paid. So every fourth quarter, we send out the demands. So I could judge from what the account was for demands and then how much of it starts out into tax title letters, because I can just add, or do I already have it on my spreadsheet? I already have it on my spreadsheet. I start at demands and then I work through all of my letters that I send out through up to the tax title process. So that would give you an indication of if there's an increase of people because of the tax rate increase, whether or not there would be
That would
a
be great
change.
information.
So I've already got this started, so it would just be a matter of maintaining it and putting the information in there.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Well, Deb, thank you both for coming down today. Certainly appreciated working with you over the years and continue through this year. But thank you very much for coming
You're welcome.
down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, fire is on page 30. Chief Assistant Chief, good evening.
Good, how are you?
Nice to see you both.
You have the sheet they're working on, or is it what I have may not be exactly the same?
So what we've been doing is giving the department heads the opportunity to tell us anything that you think is pertinent for us to know as it relates to your budget, and then we open it up for questions. And again, fire is on page 30. So.
Do you want a yearly date?
Yeah, I have the year-to-date. I didn't know if I had this the same as you. All right, well, thank you, Mrs. Delizio, for the opportunity to go over some of the operational needs and some of the...
Hang on. We're doing a little shuffle.
So is it something I said? Yeah.
Yes.
This is my ninth or my 10th year. I think it's my ninth one. That's the first time I've had the chairman actually walk out on me, so that's a little...
Okay, I sharpened my pencil. We're ready.
Anyway, so are we waiting for him or are we good?
No, go ahead.
We're good.
Okay. So what I thought I'd do first is, because there's some new faces that may or may not understand some of the stuff that the fire department does, so I wanted to try to clarify some of that. It'll make a lot more sense when you look at some of the budgetary items. So the big thing, everybody understands what the fire side of it is. EMS is a little bit different. So I want to talk about that a little bit so everybody understands what the challenges are. For the last close to 20 years, the city has made an effort to hire paramedics. This happened many, many years ago. There was some, it was a big deal when the city council worked on that ordinance to essentially make it a requirement to hire paramedics. There's a significant difference between an EMT and a paramedic. If you know, I apologize, but if you don't know, what people who are watching, I think it's important that people understand. EMTs, while they're an important part of EMS, can't do an awful lot. They can, they can do bandaging, they can give oxygen, they can do splinting. But other than that, there's not a ton that a basic EMT can do. Paramedics are recognized by the hospitals today as the most important part of emergency medicine for people having heart attacks, strokes, those types of incidents. So to say that the paramedics save lives every day is not an understatement. It's actually a fact. One of the challenges that we have now is we can't recruit paramedics. So many years ago, the council saw the wisdom in making that a requirement to be employed by the city of Attleboro. And it worked. And now we've run into an issue the last few years, is that we cannot get paramedics. I haven't hired a paramedic in 2 years. The last 13 firefighters that have been appointed have been basic EMTs. And I want to put that in perspective. This hasn't really happened since the year 2000. We haven't had that problem. We've had a couple of bumps every so often when the civil service list was close to being expired, and I know the chief talked about some of the issues with hiring civil service, so I won't go into that, but that's happened every so often. I've hired 18 firefighters in the last 3 years. 18 EMTs in the last 3 years, sorry. I've hired about 50 firefighters in the last 9. Okay, so when I say we've hired 30 or 40 paramedics, and now we haven't hired one in 2 years. Not because we're not trying, not because they're not available, we can't recruit them. Okay, so one of the challenges that we're facing now is the budget that you have before you was based on the assumption that I have 9 vacancies right now. It was based on the assumption that those 7, we're hiring 7 now, that they were going to be paramedics. They're not. Every time I hire an EMT instead of a paramedic, it's taking at least $50,000 to $60,000 out of the revolving account that year for that one employee. Okay? So a lot of the numbers you'll be seeing, like the overtime is an example, it's not enough. The overtime in my regular budget will not be enough for this fiscal year. You've never heard me say that before because every year I felt confident that I could make it work, and usually we're pretty close. Not enough this year. We're significantly short. The revolving account cannot sustain the expenses. So this fiscal year, there's going to be some communications coming here because I'm looking at least a $200,000 hole because of the 7 paramedics that we couldn't hire. That hole will get worse. I have several retirements probably coming up. Every time we hire an EMT, the hole will get $40,000 to $60,000 worse. So just keep that in mind when when you see some appropriation requests come, and you're curious as to why that's the reason.
So, Chief, when we talk about the revolving account and, the split, is the split, if we were to look at gradually changing the split, is that something that would offset that theoretically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of problems. My opinion is that the expenses for EMS, we generate over $3 million in EMS. Some of you weren't here when we raised the rates. We did it as part of the reorg several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago. To put that in perspective, back then, the fire department generated about $1.4 million a year. We now generate about 3.1. Some extra money goes into the revolving account, but I also have a lot more expenses in the revolving account now. For example, the ambulance billing. We pay all of the ambulance billing 100%. So if we generate more money next year than we did this year, I have more expenses. Our $1.1 or now $1.2 million share is less because of the expenses. We do more transports, we use more medications. Some of the medications are hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So every time we increase our revenue, our expenses are going up, and right now, we don't have the capacity to capture the additional funds. So that's not really sustainable. My personal opinion is it's time to look at the language of the ordinance and the language of the revolving account, and I believe that the city needs to decide how those funds are going to be allocated, because I don't believe that we should ever have to question having the funding for EMS, because we generate $3.2 million. The community, I think, deserves to have that money allocated toward providing EMS. Right now, I can use it to keep fire engines in service, which they do provide some EMS coverage, but it's probably not what the intent was long-term. Our call volume is increasing. We did 8,200 calls last year. When I became the chief in 2010, we did 5,500. So we've had about a 50% increase in 9 years. That's going to continue. Every time they build an apartment complex, the ambulance goes. So we won't be able to keep up with that trend. Just this week, we've had mutual aid in here. We now operate 3 ambulances, but only 1 full-time. So every time you see a second or third ambulance transporting an Attleboro ambulance, we've taken 2 fire engines out of service. Okay? When we first started doing that years ago, one of the things that's different, like at the Briggs Corner Fire Station, that ambulance only transports when there's no other ambulance available. We did that for a couple of reasons. It's good for the community, but it also provides some revenue because we bill for the service. The problem has become now we have to transport to Rhode Island Hospital a lot. They've changed its point of entry protocols. The way they do EMS is different now. It's not like when I was first a paramedic. When I became a paramedic, we'd go to a house, and it was expected that we put you in the ambulance quickly and initiate care on the way to the hospital. Those days are all gone. The guys are mandated by the Department of Public Health to initiate care at the bedside. So that's why you see all the resources show up. We have ALS, some of the fire engines are ALS. They show up, they initiate that care right at the house because the science behind EMS has recognized that that gives the patient the best likely outcome. So that's why we're doing all of those things. But the problem now is we also have to transport to Rhode Island Hospital a lot more. when we go to Rhode Island Hospital, they're out of service for 2 hours. So if Rescue 4, which is at Briggs Corner, transports 2 or 3 times in a day, we've just lost fire coverage for 6 hours. And, when it's, once it's a calculated risk, as it continues, it's becoming an issue that we're not going to be able to keep up with the calls for service for EMS. So we definitely need to be prepared. In the next 5 years, we can't handle the call volume. So we need to come up with a plan. So I would encourage people to look at all of that, including the ordinances, and take a good hard look and see if we can come up with something that will address that problem.
And if I, real quick, because I support that notion, and I think it makes sense. One thing as we go about, especially as we start looking at making recommendations for cuts and everything else, and, it's got to come from somewhere. So, instead of, I could see someone coming in saying, hey, let's throw in this ordinance, let's make that change. We have to be cognizant, and I think if it's something we do decide to do, we need to work with Barry, the administration, see what makes sense, because we want to make sure that we're being responsible about it. So,
Yeah, I do. I've discussed it with other people. I do realize if more EMS money comes into the fire department, the money has to come from someplace. I'm just thinking long term. I think the community has the right to know that those funds are going towards the service that they're intended, and it would actually stop us, from maybe doing things that isn't really the intent of that money. I'm not suggesting that we're doing that, but the revolving account it's a lot of money. We generate a lot of money, and there's $1.1 million in there. So,
right. And we just last night approved the to increase the expenditure as well. So I think the telling sign to me, and that is going from 5,500 calls to 8,200 calls in less than 10 years. So, right. Councilor Jackson, then Councilor Blair, then Councilor Dolan.
Thank you. So you're saying that there are paramedics out there that are applying for these jobs, but you're not hiring them.
Correct.
And why is that?
My opinion is that it's economics. They go into departments that have more lucrative contracts.
But do you also find that, because I did notice that, there were people young men and women who were getting the little cards from different towns earlier than Attleboro ever reaches out. We're late. We're late to the ball game every single year.
I had asked, the list was certified December 1st, and I've been asking since August to hire the vacancies and didn't get the okay until well after that. So that definitely...
We're the bottom of the list, so everybody else has already gotten hired, and then we end up with EMTs. So do they have so is it in their job requirement to become a paramedic?
We make that a condition of employment. When we hire from civil service, we ask for paramedics if they have to come sign a list. If there's not enough paramedic candidates, then they'll go to a statewide paramedic list. And then if there's still not enough candidates, the last time around we only had one person sign the list, one paramedic. There was still 400 or 500 paramedics on the list. Only one actually came and signed, said that they would take a job in Attleboro.
So how long do they have to become a paramedic? That's
we give them 2 years.
So, but we don't pay for it.
Yes, we do.
Why do we pay for it when we've been requiring all these people to become paramedics before? We have to hire paramedics.
Correct, because we can't hire them. So it's a condition of employment, so we pay for the paramedic, yes. So it's about $15,000 for the tuition. I have to pay about approximately $20,000 a year to cover their shifts when they go to paramedic school. That's the overtime. When they become a paramedic, it's a contractual item that I have to give them $5,000. That's in addition to everything they get once they are a paramedic. So I have to give them, it's $40,000 just for that. Then I have to send them to the fire academy, which is another...
After that one fight over all those years, I wasn't on the council then, when you had to be a paramedic, and there was a big, huge thing. And now we pay for them to go to paramedic school.
Yes, because we're making a condition of employment.
Stop being late to the ball game then and getting these guys.
That would help.
You get the bottom of the list.
That would help, but that probably wouldn't solve it all, because we had several. One of them was a lifelong Attleboro resident whose father was on a department. She wanted to come on the fire department, and she got a card from another community that was paying significantly more. That's why she went. We can't compete with everybody. We understand that, but I just want people to understand that right now the reason we're getting EMTs is not from a lack of effort. And we're a big department, so we're going to keep hiring. So if we hire 10 more employees and I hire 5 EMTs, there's another $200,000 in expenses that we've never factored into the budgets before. So if we're going to continue this process of hiring EMTs, we need to start factoring that in the budgets.
Can I just do a follow-up, please?
One minute, Deb.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to that, and then they could leave the employment
Yes.
of the
Right.
city of Attleboro and go to the other community
Oh, I
that
know.
has a more lucrative contract.
And we've seen that.
Yes.
We've seen that.
I don't know that I've had any that we paid to go to school leave. I'd have to check, but we've definitely had some leave.
If I could just follow up one more
Yeah,
question.
sorry
Thank you
about
very much, Counselor. So our first responders, are they still like, not just the ambulance, but just remember, you know, the ambulance, and you always had an engine go with the ambulance too?
Yes.
So it's not just the ambulance, paramedics, EMTs, because you may have a paramedic or an EMT on
fire engine.
on an engine.
Yes.
But every time an ambulance call goes out, you also send an engine, correct?
Every
Those are your
ALS, every ALS call?
Yes.
It's advanced life support, or every call where there's not an ambulance at that station. So the reality of it is it's almost all the time. And part of the reason today is that the calls have become, they're pretty complicated, so we're required to have 2 paramedics available at a call, just by Department of Public Health, for every call that requires it. We are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that, so pretty much we have 2 paramedics at every call. It's never been an issue when we don't have EMTs, but now we have 7 EMTs we're hiring. I have 1 EMT, so I have 8 EMTs. So now we don't have them yet, but we will soon. I will have 2 EMTs on every shift. That is going to make our operations very complicated because I don't have the option of putting them on an ambulance. I can't use them as a fire engine because they can't have them into the fire academy yet. And the other problem is now there's a significant delay for the fire academy. If we hire people today, I can't get them in until March. So now I'm going to be doing our own training in-house in July for the people we do hire, so we can at least use them on the fire engines a little bit, because I really can't use them on the ambulance because they're not paramedics. I can use an EMT on an ambulance. It's just we have to be careful. I have to make sure that the paramedic that's on that ambulance is experienced. I also have a lot of new paramedics, so it's, you know, we're a young department, so
Right.
it's complicated.
Vicious circle. Council Blair.
Piggybacking on couple of Kate's questions, because she beat me to it. Money is a problem in hiring paramedics. Our scale doesn't meet, you said you had one and they went to another.
It is a contributing factor, absolutely.
So if the scale for a paramedic was higher,
Yep.
if their stipend was higher in Attleboro for a paramedic, would it be easier for you to hire paramedic?
Yeah. Yeah, the surrounding, the ones, I won't name the communities because it's probably not fair, but there are
No.
half a dozen communities that pay significantly more.
Yeah.
They don't have these problems. The ones that pay what we do or less have the same problem. And now they're dealing with they're trying to figure out the same thing. So, I mean, I recognize the concerns everybody has with certain things with salaries and whatever, but it's also economics and supply and demand, and we also have a financial responsibility. I can look in the eyes and tell you 100% every EMT we hire is going to cost $40,000 to $60,000, and in 2 years, I can't guarantee they're still going to be here.
That's,
Okay, so that's, you know, it creates a hole that I want to make sure that if I have to come back in 4 or 5 months or 6 months and say I need like hundreds of thousands of dollars, that people understand that this is why.
Okay. Council Dolan?
Now, can I please finish, sir?
I didn't know you weren't finished.
That's perfectly all right. You know I speak up. If, I've always been a factor that if we train, it should be a condition of employment that they stay a certain period of
That has to be
time.
contractual.
That's got to be
But it can be
contractual,
done.
yeah.
It only makes sense.
Yep.
I mean, you're hiring somebody and you're putting out $40,000 to train them, right?
Yep.
And it happens. It happens on the police department. He talked about it tonight. We've got police officers we've trained and put, I don't know, $70,000, $80,000 worth into their training. It takes 2 years, a year and a half to get them on the street. And they're going to the state police. They're going to Boston. There's nothing to hold them here.
Correct.
If we're not going to hold them, I think we ought to pay them first of all, Chief.
Well, there's 2 ways. You got to attract them and then you have to hold them.
Well, yeah, you need to attract them first. I mean, we
Yeah,
can't
we got to
keep them if we
attract
don't
them,
get 'em.
and the way they attract them today, Kyle said you can't get guys to work overtime. In his department, can't get them to work overtime. It's become a 2-income family, and their free time's worth more than to work overtime, because the wife's at home kicking in her share, and she wants her husband home to spend time with the kids and the family.
Right.
Times have changed.
Let's just bring it back in a little bit,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Thank you.
But I was just trying to say, we've got to up the salary somehow to attract paramedics that we desperately need. But also, we have to retain them once we get them. And retaining them is not getting them to a point where they'll go to another town for another $5,000 or whatever, because it's all money today.
So,
We should have a retainment as condition of employment. If you leave after you're trained,
I totally support that.
they gotta,
But again,
the town they go to
But
either.
again, Peter, that's contractual, so we can't solve that here today. So I think
but it
we're all in agreement with what you're saying, because I know I personally am, but that's contractual. So,
I just asked if it would help.
yeah, I understand,
money.
but I just want to pull it back in, because I
You
have
just did.
several different
You just
tickets.
did, I appreciate that.
Okay, so my head's kind of spinning a little bit. You talk really fast.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just trying to keep up. So, the $3.2 million that we collect, those are fees like what? Ambulance
We
fees?
bill insurance companies. It's between 3 and 3.2 million.
Okay. And so that we can't raise, aren't we at the maximum allowable by state of the fees that we charge for that stuff?
The state doesn't set a maximum fee. What the state has is if people have Mass Health or Medicare, regardless of what we bill, that's all we can collect, and we can't balance bill.
Okay.
So we are billing well above that. We're billing at the higher end of the counties. And so you understand, because one of the concerns people have with the billing is that they feel like we're soaking the residents, and it's not accurate, because if we don't bill, insurance companies are required, they actually have cash reserves. They have money set aside to actually pay for pre-hospital EMS. So when the municipality or anybody doesn't actually bill the insurance companies are the only ones that are making money on that. And we have there's a mechanism in place to waive fees for people who can demonstrate their inability to pay. Everybody in Attleboro who's elderly or low income has some type of health insurance, whether it's Mass Health or Medicare, so they don't get balance billed for anything.
Right, so you can bill whatever you want, but it doesn't mean you're going to get the 5,000
You
or
have
hypothetically whatever.
the Cadillac Health Insurance Blue Cross, we'll bill that, and you may get balance billed for that. You might.
Okay.
And I could see Deb shaking her head about the revenue.
Yeah, I'm going to check that number.
With the supplemental money that's coming in this year, the $350,000, we'll be right around $3 million.
I'm still going to check the number,
Yeah, that's-
which,
Yeah.
the other thing, I just want to caution people as you look at the revolving fund. Just remember, the money has to be there. So $3 million is over the course of a year, if it's billed, if it's collected, and all that other stuff. If you shift expenses into the revolving fund and say, hey, you know what, we're going to give a greater percentage to the revolving fund too, and that money doesn't actually, it's not there on the day you need it, you haven't solved anything. So if there's going to be a thoughtful discussion about evaluating, where the money goes, in the general fund, that money is used to support the overall general fund, of which the fire department budget is, requested this year at $9.5 million. So it's, I'm not going to solve the problem for you. I just want to point out that you have the revolving fund, but you also have $9.5 million worth of expenses being supported in the general fund, in part by the revenues through the ambulance billing, and in part through the taxpayer of the city. So
Yeah, it's
not going to solve the problem. And the chief and I have spoken at length a number of times, and I don't have a solution, but I think it's going to compound and get worse if you're not able to hire paramedics, or in the current collective bargaining, I don't believe there's any requirement for repayment. There is something in the police about the police academy, but there isn't relative to the fire, and some of the costs associated with training paramedics are not borne by the city, but you're absorbing the cost of the salary while they're going, and the other training and the overtime backfill and all that other stuff. That you're never going to recoup. There's, it's not like the $3,000 payment to the police academy that we have people contribute and get the money back. I don't have an answer. I think that it's a decent discussion point to start today. I just want to caution folks, if you evaluate the revolving fund and think you're going to solve the problem by shifting a percentage of the revenue for ambulance over to the revolving fund, you've created a gap of revenue in the general fund.
Yep.
And you haven't necessarily solved the timing of his problem. You certainly won't be solving the issue of hiring and retaining paramedics.
You more articulately stated what I was trying to earlier, so thank you. Vice President Pika.
Can I just finish, please?
Didn't know you weren't?
No, well,
So here's the way this works, folks. So you raise your hand, I call on you. And I'm just saying, there's been a couple times that people have said, can I finish? So, you know, when we're done asking a question, if no one asks another question right there, I'm not to know that there's not another one. So thank you. Continue.
So I'm confused about the part where you say we're not getting paramedics, but we're hiring EMTs, which is creating issues. Do we have to have a certain number of EMT? Like, if the EMTs, they can't do ALS.
Can't do ALS.
So why are we hiring, and I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but that they can't do these tasks? Why are we hiring them at $50,000, $60,000 a year when it?
We can't get paramedics. So we asked for paramedics, they're not applying.
But do we have to hire the EMTs? That don't seem to be.
Well, no, then we could just have less employees and we wouldn't have enough to keep the stations open. That's the only other option. I mean, we're at the bare bones minimum for firefighters. So when we're hiring firefighters, really. We're a civil service fire department. So when we hire people, it's not necessarily because we need EMTs or paramedics. We're hiring because we need physical bodies. We need firefighters. And then when we look at the operational needs, we recognize that having the firefighters provide EMS, having them cross-trained allows us to get the most bang for our buck. So that's why we're asking civil service to hire paramedics.
So in order
to hire firefighters.
But in order to be civil service, it used to be that you had to be a firefighter and EMT, paramedic.
No,
it's not that way
it's up to the
anymore.
municipality. We can ask for just for firefighters. We can ask for firefighters who are certified as EMTs, or we can ask for firefighters who are certified as paramedics. But if we ask for firefighters only, then I'm going to have to send them to EMT school, and then I'll have to send them to paramedic school.
And do EMTs want to go to paramedic school that we have?
We make them now. We require them. Some of the people that were EMTs before wouldn't go on their own, but now it's a condition of employment. So
okay, what's the start? What do we charge? I mean, what do we give for a starting salary for a paramedic here, approximately?
If you factored everything, I'd have to say probably starting, they're walking the door, probably $70,000. With everything, all of the bells and whistles and everything.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President Pika.
Thank you, Chairperson Delesio. So I think, just to roll it back just a little bit, as what part and parcel of the fundamental problem is for the fire department is that they can't hire, they're having difficulty, we have to hire the EMTs. And it was brought to our attention that the cards are going out late. Would it be fair to say that you can't pull the trigger to start the hiring process until you get the affirmative from the administration?
Yeah, and then personnel starts.
And personnel. So they have to give you the okay to start that. So it's not like you're sitting at home twiddling your thumbs saying, I don't want to do this.
When we have the vacancy,
you have to wait for that to be
right
able
away,
to be.
Asking for the authorization to hire.
Okay.
Once we get that, personnel request the list.
So could there be potential that if you get the go-ahead from personnel in the administration earlier, you might be able to have a better...
And this, honestly, this is a brand-new paramedic list. So this is, in the previous year, we were on a list that had almost expired. This is a brand-new certified list. So there were as many paramedics on it as part of the problem is there's a significant paramedic shortage statewide. Mm-hmm. They've changed the requirements to become a paramedic. All of the schools are affiliated with a college now, so you have to have certain college classes to get in. There is a significant requirements now to become a paramedic. It's not as simple as it was. The program is longer than it used to be, so they're not turning them out as quickly. The current list probably had about, out of 5,000 approximately, civil service, 5,000 people passed the civil service test saying they wanted to be a firefighter in Massachusetts. That's an approximate number. About 450 or 500 of them were paramedics. That's it. Okay, so you're looking at 450 or 500 paramedics in each civil service community in Massachusetts, which is probably at least a half, maybe 2/3 of them, that hires is competing for those 450 paramedics. That's the problem. So even if we were a little early, we might get 1 or 2. If we hire 10, we're never going to hire 10 paramedics. Not going to happen here. So if we're not going to do that, then we got to really look at the other options.
Thank you.
Council Copus.
Thank you for coming in. First and foremost, I understand the concern with the paramedics. I understand that that's probably the biggest issue facing you. I do appreciate the increase with the 4 new dispatchers so that we could have the 4 additional firefighters available to go on calls. As a general statement, I am concerned moving forward with the budget, knowing full well that it's not sufficient and you'll be coming back.
Yeah, I mean, I am too. And like I said, when I built it, we were trying to hire paramedics. So, I mean, there was obviously nobody knew. I didn't know, Barry didn't know, the mayor was not aware of this when everything got submitted.
Sure. So that's just a general concern. I do have 2 quick questions. On line 558211, the Scott Air Packs, we have that listed at 15,000, which is a significant increase from last year. And then for the foul weather gear, we have that at 80,000.
Yeah.
Where does that leave us with regard?
Scott Air Pack. Okay. All right. So the Scott Air Pack. So you know what that is? If you don't know, that's our air bottles.
My question is, where does that leave us? Would that be considered the turnout gear, and would that?
No, it's separate.
Okay.
Scott Air Packs is separate. That's the breathing cylinders, the breathing apparatus. And in this particular case, this fiscal year, the only reason the revised amount is so low is because, as you all know, the free cash is pretty limited. So all departments have had to use internal transfers to meet other needs that came up. I could find out what I transferred that for, but that money was transferred. So we certainly could have used all of that money for Scott Air Packs. Something came up internally that was more pressing at the time, so we did an internal transfer for that, knowing that that would probably get funded again this year and that we could kind of, follow through with it this year. The turnout gear
I don't see that on here. Am I missing it?
What's that? The turnout gear?
Yes.
It's listed as fall weather gear.
Fall weather.
Okay, right. So that's at 80,000. That's the one I mentioned.
Yep, and that was one, and I make sure that that the mayor gets his appropriate credit for that. That's a conversation that the previous administration, that was funded at the bare bones minimum. We always came as a capital request to try to keep up with the turnout gear. This mayor has, in conversation, said that he prefers that to be in my operating budget. So that was one item that actually he didn't want to cut at all. It was discussed, not by me, and so he.
But so where does this leave us?
For PPE, for turnout gear?
Yes.
How many does that 80,000 buy, if you don't mind jumping?
Approximately, what, 25 cents? 23?
2,500 per second set. So we're going to leave about 10,000 or so in there for the incidentals, the broken helmet, gloves, things like that. So you'd have 70,000 to spend. So.
Yeah, so maybe 20 sets. So we have 36 without.
We have 36 people on the department right now that don't have a second.
But the 7 we're hiring right now also don't have any.
Okay. So now
first sets or
they don't have any.
43 realistically.
The 7 we're hiring don't have a first or a second set.
Okay.
So what we've been doing with them is the past few groups is we've been asking the administration to fund 2 sets for a brand new hire, so we don't keep digging ourselves the hole that we're in. We're trying to play catch up. We don't want to add on to it.
Obviously, because at the end of the fiscal year for those 7 isn't really a realistic request at the time.
So with this, we'll still be short by the end of the year.
Oh yeah, we'll still be short. This will catch us up. We'll still have probably 20 guys that don't have, 20 firefighters that don't have a second set with that.
16, 15,
Okay.
15 or so.
So my second question is, you and I had talked about the firehouse software. Is that what it's called? The software used for the inspections?
Oh, yeah, it's not called Firehouse. I forget the name of it, but.
Okay.
The CAD software?
No, for fire prevention.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Is that included in here at all?
No, it's not in here.
Okay.
No, we don't have computers, so there's not a tremendous need for them to have software to do the inspections.
So you guys are really running at
Yeah,
sort of
they're
a
doing
bare
everything on
bones.
paper for their inspections.
Okay. And that, if I remember correctly, that software would significantly help with the inspections and the professionalism of
They would get,
everything. And
the people would get an email, almost immediately after the inspections were done. They'd be getting email alerts when it was time for their inspections. We right now with pen and paper and phone calls.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Contini. Councilor Blair?
Just a quickie. Your budget for turnout gear doesn't cover, you're going to still be short. 25 guys on that department are not going to have a second set of turnout gear.
We'll still be short probably 15 to 17.
Yeah.
15 sets.
15 to 17 after spending that
If we
money.
spend all that at 80,
You still got guys out there that are only going to have one set.
yes.
I don't think that's fair to your troops.
No, I agree. And one of the conversations I did have with the mayor, he did say, I met with him just last week, he did say that it's his intent, I'll send him a communication for July 1st. That he said that he would, fund whatever was
The
necessary.
remainder?
Huh?
He said he would fund the remainder?
Yeah, he told me he would fund the remainder, so,
It should be coming down July 2nd then, so
yeah,
I
I
think
have
we're all
it written, I
anxiously
just
waiting
have
to
to
see
hit
that
send,
one.
so I would hope that, 'cause I would
But
agree with that.
you've been assured that those
Yeah, he
17
told me
guys
that,
are going to be
yeah, he told
taken
me that.
care of. Thank you.
Okay.
And,
We've been
and
asking
he's
since March.
been true to his word, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he'll do it.
Yeah. Of course. Deb?
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand
Yep.
clearly. Your budget for 2020 as presented on your salary page shows replace FF, so there's 5 replacements and there's 2 vacant.
You look at the salary sheets?
Yep.
Okay.
So the 5 that are replacing, those are 5 hires that you plan on hiring when? Next year, or
No,
those
they'll
the
be
7
hired-
you're talking
they'll be
about
in
now?
June. They'll be hired in June.
So in June
It's
of
actually
2000, pardon me?
It's actually 7.
Okay.
Because what you don't see in that budget is that I had 2 resignations before this, after this was submitted. So
So theoretically, you have the funding for it someplace in the salary line, those additional
I
2?
have everything funded except for the personal protective equipment, the turnout gear. That was the only thing. The uniforms, the medicals, everything necessary is funded.
So your new hires in June, everything is funded for the balance of 2019 to get you through the balance of 2019
Yes.
for those employees.
Yep.
And for 2020, everything is funded relative to salary. What's missing is the training money,
Yes.
which you're averaging is about $40,000 to $60,000 per hire.
Yep.
So you have 7
Yep.
at $40,000 to $60,000.
Yes. It's-
And you have turnout gear that you need for 15. And you need double turnout gear for the 2 sets of turnout gear for the 7 that are being hired.
Yes.
And we just said that $70,000 of turnout gear gets you 15 people?
About 20.
Yeah,
20
there'll be
people?
15 left out of the
So
36.
you're going to need $500,000 starting July 2nd in order to have adequate supply money for turnout gear and money for training for the people that you're hiring that start in the middle of June of 2019. Is
Yeah,
that a
yeah.
fair summary?
That's a pretty fair summary.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I got it.
Give it
Including the gear
10%.
instructor.
Pardon me?
I mean, give it take 10%. But
Yeah, 50,000, 450, 500, a significant amount of
It's
money.
significant. And a big part of that is the new cost. We've always had to cover them going to the fire academy, so we built that into our budget. The new cost is, I would offset some of the overtime during the fiscal year with the EMS revolving account. In previous years, I've had $400,000 to $500,000 in the revolving account allocated to overtime. This year, to balance my revolving account, I had to drop that to $275,000. That was balanced when I thought I was hiring 7 paramedics. Now I have to come up with, at realistically, probably $250,000 in the revolving account to fix that hole.
That's on top of the $500,000 I just said.
No, that was included.
No, that's
That's included?
That's
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
So-
right. So I'm
Okay.
a $250,000 short in the revolving account and a $250,000 short in the, and I mean, we can get lucky if we don't have a lot of injuries. The overtime is always based on statistical data for the last 4 to 5 years of how many people are hurt, how many people are out sick. But when you get to the minimum staffing levels, because right now we are at the minimum staffing level. Even when we hire these 7, they're going to be at paramedic school and/or the fire academy. So we're going to be operating at the bare bones minimum, which is very dangerous because when that happens, you get a couple of injuries. One injury costs the fire department $2,000 a week.
Right.
So you can't really budget for that, and if it happens, it's a big hole. One thing that I haven't done historically, we've been able to absorb a lot of those costs, but probably going forward, that if I know there's a hole, and rather than try to do internal transfers, my intention is to actually send a memo, request the funding for it right away, so that everybody clearly understands that this was a problem that we saw in August or September. Even if it's not funded, at least everybody will know that it was identified as a problem in September. Because we try to play catch up, and we kind of hope that you get lucky at the end of the fiscal year, that people don't get hurt, people that are hurt come back. One unexpected retirement at the end of the fiscal year is pretty significant. So.
And that could happen. You don't always get.
I have 9 guys that could retire today if they wanted to.
Right, and again, not to keep drawing the parallels, but same with the police. They have quite a few. So, Kate, do you still have a
Hey,
question?
just a quick question. So you were saying, so when you hire them over the summer, you still have to wait quite a while. I think you said till March.
Right now the wait is about March to get to the fire academy.
So when will they actually need turnout gear if they're not going to be attending a fire and they're not?
Nope, that's a good question. That's a good question, because what we've done in the past is that, and my assistant chief kind of cringes when I say it, but one of the things that I used to do, when we hired paramedics, I would put them on the ambulance and I'd put a department notice out that would basically say, like, you don't go do firefighting. It drove the deputies crazy because at a structure fire, I would have a couple of guys that can't go and do firefighting.
They haven't been trained.
They haven't been trained. But I didn't give them the equipment because I didn't want them to go in because they weren't trained. I figured at least they could work on the ambulance. Now that they're EMTs, it puts the cringe, it kind of messes up that plan. So now we're looking at it like, I can't really use them that much on the ambulance.
And they can't dispatch.
Right, they can't dispatch, and I can't use them as a firefighter, so I kind of have to use them as a firefighter. So
you're in a position where you have to do more with less.
Yeah, it's a series of unfortunate events.
So when will they need the turnout gear?
Well, we're gonna do departmental training for them right away in July. So that we're gonna do a 3-week training program that the fire academy recognizes. It doesn't take place of going to the fire academy, but it will allow us to use those 7 as firefighters right away in a manner that's as safe as it can be. The problem is that for them to do that, they have to have turnout gear.
Okay,
so what we're doing, and I don't know if the communication came down yet, this is where the communication was to rent the turnout gear, and I spoke to several chiefs. Other chiefs have run into this problem. Well, if we buy the gear, and I had the conversation with the mayor too, he's like, do we buy it today? And the problem is if we bought it today, it's custom built. Turnout gear it's custom built because it has a shelf life of 10 years. The NFPA standard is after 10 years, you can't use it. So they don't stock this stuff, and when you buy it, it's been manufactured for 3 years. They come and they measure the firefighters, and because your husband did it, they measure the firefighters, and they then order the gear. We get it in about 2 to 3 months.
3 months.
3 months. So we'd hire them before, I'd put them on the ambulance, we'd order the gear, we'd come in a few months, they'd go to the academy, it was okay. Now we're trying to figure out a way to get these guys on the fire engines as quickly as we can in the summer so that they can actually count as employees. So that's why when you see the request for the renting of the turnout gear, it's $500 per firefighter
for 12 weeks,
12 weeks
yep.
Which is a lot of departments are doing it just for the initial training of the recruits because they can get it right away.
Thank you.
Anything else? Gentlemen, thank you for coming down.
Thank you. If you have any other questions, you know how to reach me.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time and all the support. And on behalf of all the fire departments, we really do appreciate the support.
We appreciate everything you do for us, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have water, and that'll be in the water book. We have the water.
You have the enterprises?
Yeah.
That's okay. This is really helpful.
Yeah, Todd, nice job on this.
I can't understand this.
Now it's like
There's a lot of
backwards
information.
compared to your thing when I'm trying to, my brain isn't working both ways on the.
Good, how are you?
Hi.
Welcome. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So what we've been doing, and these guys are probably tired of hearing the spiel at this point, but what we've been doing is just opening it up to the department heads, talk about the budgets, things you think we should know, and then we'll be opening it up to questions. All right. Floor is yours, Courtney.
Okay, sure. We actually did our best to keep everything as level funded as possible, which we certainly did. There's a couple of items of note on here that you'll notice. One of them is the chemical line, which would be 553130. That went up significantly this year. We use 6 bulk chemicals between the 2 plants. 3 of them renewed their bids. Between the 3 that didn't, they went up anywhere from 10 to 33% per unit price. So that was a significant increase. Excuse me. And the other significant increase that you'll probably notice is lights and power. And there is a reason for that as well, because of water quality out in the distribution system. We're actually running our ozone on a regular basis. We used to just run it spring and fall, and now we're running it daily. And it's ballpark about $300 a day to run it. So that was a significant increase this year too. And everything else was roughly the same, or lower.
I'll open it up to my committee for any questions.
Todd, you need to do one of your little fancy spreadsheets for these.
I know. The only question I really had was if you look at printing repro and postage, the requested amount was quite a bit more than what was actually recommended. Were we planning on printing and sending something out, or why?
The original thought was just in case we got into trouble with the THM mailings again, it cost us a ballpark, I believe it was about $10,000 to mail it for 1 quarter. So I'd originally requested enough to mail it all 4 quarters in case we got in trouble.
Okay.
Looking at the February results, and we're hopeful for May that we're going to stay back in compliance. What is actually recommended leaves enough room for 1 mailing, just in case.
Okay.
Do you have anything?
I don't have anything significant. I mean, retirement obviously increases this budget. Water, wastewater, and general government. Water and wastewater are separated out. The insurance that you had asked about the other day, both Councilor Delicio and Cobus had asked about that. The insurance in this budget, account 574010, reflects the recommended amount reflects the adjustment to the 2019 actual as anticipated. The actual is slightly less than that, but the endorsements are still outstanding for the water department. We had talked about the general government side, that the request was higher, but there are outstanding endorsements. There were 2 additional properties that were added, so that is an adjustment down that the administration reflected. You can see, we talked about debt the other night in this budget with the city treasurer and the director of budget and administration. You can see that, unlike other departments, both water and wastewater have their own reserve fund, so they have some place to go if they did need the additional mailing that Courtney just referred to. They could always come back to the council and request that money. They have their own reserve for the 53rd week, which is consistent with the way Barry budgeted it for the general government side. The other elements to the budget, that there was a pay down, I believe, Barry, right? But that's all structured in, I believe there's a pay down in this budget. Maybe it's wastewater.
No, it's wastewater.
It's wastewater, sorry, I'm getting confused. But the transfer to OPEB, the $50,000 funding for OPEB, that's consistent with what we've done for the last several years in this budget. Nothing in the department jumps out at me. They're doing quite a few capital projects and stuff. That obviously is not here. The other thing to keep in mind, if there is any outsourcing in billing, the collector's office does do a great deal of support to both water and wastewater relative to billing, and those costs would have to be reviewed next year if something changes,
Okay, that's a fair point.
you know.
Is next year the cycle to review the indirect costs again?
I guess it depends on your perspective and who you talk to. I would say yes. I think I don't think it's unreasonable for the administration, for the council to suggest and request that in its budget message to the administration. A review of the indirect, if it was performed during 2020, would probably be water, wastewater, and the general government, because you do the entire analysis, everything gets reviewed, and then it would be that you'd implement that for the following year, 2021. That budget would be the year that you would implement it. Depending on the RFQ or the RFP that goes out for the service, I don't think you'd want to implement that against the school. We use the school administrative per pupil cost that's been agreed to between the school committee and the city, and I don't think you could change that. But the indirect cost would be available for water and wastewater adjustments. You can't just implement it with, you need to do a study, and if you try to change the one you have.
I just wasn't sure
Yeah,
what.
I think that's the request, right? You would make that request, it would be a professional service. The cost is usually split between three, right? The general government pays for a third, water pays for a third, wastewater pays for a third. Anytime you reevaluate the indirects, there's quantitative analysis that's done. In addition to that, there's discussions about services that are no longer rendered in-house. So for example, if we outsourced the printing of bills and we knew the cost per bill that was outsourced, we would now know how much of that would be directly attributable to water or wastewater. Anytime there's an identified cost that we can actually bill to water and wastewater, it's pulled out and if it's something it's billed to water and wastewater directly, not as an indirect. So the more of that's determined, what is in the indirect would theoretically diminish over time.
That makes sense.
So I believe it's something that is warranted. Our indirect cost analysis has stood up to DOR review relative to, is it reasonable? We do a study, it's reasonable. The dollar amounts are not out of order. I've heard horror stories from representatives from the Department of Revenue saying, when we actually asked, we found out that 100% of the salary of the city auditor is charged to water. Well, that's not the case here. There is a thoughtful process that goes into it. I'm never going to be the person to say it doesn't warrant review more frequently. I think it does. But it needs to be thoughtful and not at the point today, let's just change the percentage. We would have to do the review and implement the percentage going forward.
Judging by the head nods, I think this entire committee's in agreement.
Which means we probably don't need to have a meeting next Wednesday night.
I'd still like to, because I think you did research. I think it's just going to augment this conversation. So I don't think it would. So, we're going to have the meeting next Wednesday night because I want to read the budget into the record anyway. So we do that, and then we'll be good. But okay. Anything else? Did you have another question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anything? Council Vice President Preco?
Thank you. So my only question is, I know that there's there's been a lot of internal promotion, which in and of itself, but there isn't, I wrote my notes, hold on 1 second. Lab manager position, any update on that?
Yes, actually, we hired somebody mid-April. So he's been with us a few weeks. So instead of the lab manager remaining vacant, it's actually going to be the lab tech.
So you combine those two positions, is that?
Basically.
Okay. That's pretty much all.
Council Corpus?
So, not relating to the budget, but just to help me understand some of the water main breaks that have been happening. If you have
if we could take that one offline, if you don't mind, just I want to stick to the, if you can tie it into the
I'd love
budget.
to see a list of all of them, or a map with all of them.
Sure.
Council Conchi, did you have something, or?
No, I'm just heartened by the comments from Deb. because I thought that I had some issues ahead of me that I no longer think I have ahead of me. But I will say that should the new indirect costs now lower than what we were accustomed to paying, I would be looking and pushing, depending on whether or not I'm actually sitting in a seat the next term, which is certainly questionable, of getting that money slid into a capital improvement fund inside the department, so that you could actually have a capital improvement budget on an annual basis. And there's a lot of ifs in all that, but I think that's where we need to be going.
So I think that'd be good talking points for next Wednesday night as well.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the long list of the things that she's got coming up and all the bonding that's going to take place, we're many years away from getting to a point where we have a capital budget on an annual basis that can take care of this without bonding. I understand that.
But as long as we get step one taken care of.
Exactly.
And next year, it's going to be gradual. Even
That's exactly the point.
with a lot of the woes we have, it's going to be gradual.
Correct.
You know, it's a fool's errand to try to fix it with one fell swoop. So, excellent. Thank you both for coming down.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, I am so impressed.
That's what we try to do.
2 meetings in a row like this. This is great.
We're going back last year. Come on down, Tom.
Hi, good evening.
Welcome. So the spiel for the last time this evening is we're giving the department head opportunity to just talk about your budget. Anything you think that's important for the council to know?
I think the biggest
Open it
thing,
up to questions at the end.
the biggest thing, just like water, is we both use the same type of chemicals, and that was our most significant increase, was our bulk chemicals went anywhere from 5.5% to almost 32% increase. Out of the 6 bulk we used, 3 chose not to renew. So there was a significant increase over last year in bulk chemical prices.
And a lot of that's mandated by the state.
It's all mandated in to run the process, the plant, and the increase we're being told is due to new federal DOT regulations on the trucking. It's brought the price of trucking the product through the roof. So.
Questions?
Just have a comment.
Comments?
Thank you. Since both water and wastewater have mentioned chemicals, it's just so, I just find it so funny that everybody's talking about organics now and you know, organic chemicals and everything. But you hear now that all these chemicals, like Dennis Walsh had a request where he had to go up, I forget, was it 7-10% or something? Because the chemicals have all gone up so high, and same with you. It's just, it blows my mind since everybody always talks organic chemicals. And you would think they would be much more higher, and the poisonous chemicals would decrease, you would think, in today's day and age.
It's supply and demand. It also has to do with the economy. When the economy is booming, production is booming, everybody's building, the raw material prices go up, and these chemicals are manufactured from those raw materials. So that also increases the price of the chemical costs.
Oh, see, interesting. I didn't know that. Thanks.
Relative to chemicals, Tom, is there any change in the processes? I mean, occasionally I remember...
We're running record flows right now due to, as you know, for the last year or so, we've had a lot of rain. So infiltration is up in the plant. So our pumping is up. Our treatment process is treating a lot more water than it normally would. So that increases the amount of chemical demand you have. Our chemical usage is up this year because of that. So predicting it into next year with the increases in the chemical costs is why the price went up so much.
Sorry. I should have pointed out when Courtney was here, and I failed to do so. There's no rate increase for either water or wastewater this year. I think that goes, all of you know, but I don't know if anybody watching doesn't. The other thing is there's a $250,000 required vote of the council for water in order to support the operation of the budget instead of increasing the rate. Fair to say, I think, right, Barry?
Correct.
So
Rate stabilization.
Rate stabilization vote. Wastewater, there are also votes that need to be taken. A rate stabilization vote of $200,000 for the wastewater, not out of line with things. Their septic fee revenue for fiscal 2019 is up a little bit over the $50,000 estimate. That, I believe Tom said, we think is because of the high water table.
Yes.
And then the other thing is there's the betterment share of the annual debt service votes. Those have been going on for the better part of 20 years.
Yeah.
That's the annual contribution. When you pay a betterment, the betterment basically is anybody that pays in advance over time or any of that, that money's sort of sitting, and it's part of what is certified retained earnings for wastewater. This is the portion that's attributable to that, based on a calculation that we developed many, many years ago, and those votes, they're much smaller dollar amounts, but it is still votes that need to happen as part of the budget votes for wastewater. So I just wanted to make sure to mention that. Everything else is pretty standard. The $50,000 for the OPEB, they have $50,000 in the reserve fund, they have the money reserved for the 53rd week, they have the salary money, the retirement is, the increase is reflected in there. The health insurance, again, they use the estimated numbers based on previous year's enrollment, because open enrollment hadn't been finished before the budget came down, but Barry used reasonable increases in all of that stuff based on the 2.5% increase. So.
Council Corbett and Council Conti?
So I didn't have any significant questions. I saw software maintenance where you had asked for $2,500 and ended up being zero. It was a small amount, but my question to you is, what's your biggest concern with this budget, and where do you think things will be tightest?
Equipment maintenance. The plant is, most of the equipment's been online since 2004 when we rebuilt. It's getting very costly. You know, we have a $60,000 line. It's generally never enough. You know, one piece of equipment would be $15,000, $20,000 to repair, never mind replace if something breaks down. That's the tightest thing, is there's a lot of equipment that's going to need to be really seriously looked at about replacing. We're getting to the point now where we have to consider upgrading the plant again, doing a major overhaul, because the life expectancy is at, 20 years maybe. We're pushing 15 now. And it's just going to get real costly to repair this equipment. A lot of it can't be replaced anymore or repaired. It has to be replaced because of its age. Parts are becoming obsolete. So that's going to be something that's, every year it gets harder and harder to maintain the equipment and stay within the budget.
Council Conti? Yeah.
And is that something you're working on a plan to develop for a major site overhaul, or
I think we need to have the facility looked at, and we need to actually come up with it's going to be a capital project. We need to look at what needs to be replaced and phase it in. I think we're going to have to. We have no choice. Otherwise, we're going to be at the 20-year mark again, and we're going to have to replace the entire plant again. Either we start doing it now, piece by piece, and do what needs to be done first, priorities, or we're going to have to do it all at once again, and that's going to be a big price tag.
Okay.
You good?
Yes.
So Tom, when you were sitting at the back of the room, we had a conversation about indirect costs with Courtney. Were you able to hear that?
No, not really.
So the Budget Committee is of the opinion that it's time to review the indirect costs. And to do that, we need to go out and hire a firm to do a survey. And I'm hoping that the council will have some visibility into that scope of work that firm will have. And there's a small chance that your new indirect costs may be lower in 2021 than they are in 2020. And if I'm still here, which is certainly questionable, because this is an election year and we're talking 2 years out, I'll be pushing for the delta, the difference between what you're paying now and indirect costs and what you would be paying, to be going into a new line item in your budget for capital improvement, with the intent that over years, decades, that amount would be increased on a regular basis, perhaps to accommodate these phases, if the phases can be scaled down small enough to be bid off in annual chunks. This is it's like sitting on a horse looking at a windmill. There's a lot of things that have to go right for all that to happen, but if there's no plan and no place to start, it's never going to happen. So in the Budget Committee's opinion, it starts with a new indirect study, which is now 5 years old. And hopefully that'll be better than the, well, we'll see. We just have to roll the dice and see what happens. But we're not out of line now, but if there's things that, you know, the water department and the wastewater department could take on to lower that indirect cost, it could all be pushed into capital projects. And you've got a ton of capital projects. So something has to happen. There has to be some kind of budget planning to accommodate everything that you need to do down there.
Counselor, I look forward to you putting that suggestion as articulately as you just put it into the budget
I
message.
wish, yeah. Well, you know, it's like the police training. You know, there's so much to put into this budget message that we'll
It's going to be robust.
We'll get there, and that concludes my comments. Unless you have some questions about the indirect costs.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you for your comments. All right, well, I think that's it. I think that's a wrap. Before I adjourn, what I will ask going forward, because if you're going to ask follow-up questions, please just come to the chair, because if you're not asking, I'm not expecting the follow-up questions, I'll call on someone. I just want to make sure that we're respectful of that and that we're all able to get the questions asked. So that'll be my ask for tomorrow, and if we bring anyone else down. So
before you close, I do have a question for you to ask the fire chief, if now's the appropriate time to do that.
Of course.
If suppose I went to work for the fire chief and I went to work as an EMT with the agreement that I was going to become a paramedic, and he spent $60,000 putting me to school, and after 2 years I get my paramedic certificate, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
and I get an offer from Stoneham that's $10,000.
Good town, good town.
$10,000 more than I'm being paid in Attleboro.
Yep.
Is there a union prevention to stop the fire chief from offering me that $10,000 delta and keeping me on the staff?
I don't know if it's a, I don't, and I can find out for sure, but it's not
To
union.
my knowledge, to my knowledge, there's no provision in the contract
No.
that would offer you, it would allow,
Him to match that.
right, there's no, yeah.
Because if,
There's no,
because then it
so
becomes.
that's the concern there, I
Yeah.
mean, but that's a matter of administration and collective bargaining. But
So
yes,
I don't think I understand the language. What's preventing the fire chief from doing that?
You do it for one, you have to do it for all.
Okay, so,
But it would also have to be negotiated into the contract.
So you can't
into
make a
the-
payment to anybody for any reason unless there's an agreement to do
Unless
so.
it's- 'cause I
I
deal with
won't
that.
sign the warrant.
Yeah.
So they could-
interesting.
yeah. So you have to, so for
So how does
accounts-
that happen in other governments?
I don't know, but you have to, so they might have an agreement.
Here's what I'll do. I'm going to adjourn,
Yes,
and then we can continue certainly after.
yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned, 7:42. Tomorrow night,
3 minutes early. Nice.
what we did.
If you're aware of that in another community, if you let me know, I'll call their town accountant or city auditor and